You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favorite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment, and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad, and in over 4 million car dashboards. It's on demand and it's on the go. No downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. You can stream your favorite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers that enjoy talking about other directors' work. And as one of these specials, today we are joined by a very special guest indeed, aren't we, Simon?
We are indeed. We are joined by Charles de Lauzirika, who is the director-producer on a lot of DVD documentaries that you've seen, like the Alien Quadrilogy and Dangerous Days, and he is also the director of Crave. So thank you for joining us.
Welcome, Charles. Welcome. All the way from California. We're Skyping. Is that correct?
That's correct. Sunny Los Angeles.
I'll be out there at the end of the month. So yes, looking forward to it. Now, I don't know, you've probably not listened to any of our podcasts before, and why would you have? But you'll know that one of the things we talk a lot about as being avid movie fans is we are really into our DVD and Blu-ray collections, and particularly special features, documentaries, and things of that nature, which is why it's such a thrill to have you involved today.
Well, I have listened to a previous podcast, so I know where you guys are coming from, and I'm really excited to talk to you about whatever it is you want to talk about, because I love talking movies and I love talking about my work. So let's do it.
So Charles, where did it start for you? Where did you study?
Well, I studied officially. I went to USC School of Cinema and Television, which is where George Lucas and Robert Zemeckis and John Singleton and those guys went to, John Carpenter. But I feel like I'd been studying long before that as a kid, making Super 8 movies on my own. And that came about, first of all, it begins with finding movies that I was madly in love with, like Jaws and Star Wars, which really kind of set me on the path of not just being a movie fan, but also trying to figure out how they made them. And fortunately with Star Wars, that was one of the first films that I remember as a kid that really promoted how they made them. They actually put out, the making of Star Wars on TV, and they actually showed you, these cool miniatures in front of blue screens that they would blow up. And as a kid, you think about, wow, I want to blow up TIE fighters and X-Wings, and I want to do this stuff. So it began with that, and then Super 8 kind of experiments, based on having read magazines like Cinemagic and Cinefex and various, like American Cinematographer, things like that. But then eventually, one gets serious, and then you try to go to school, and that's where I ended up, was at USC Film School.
What was it like attending it? Because we can only imagine.
It's interesting because, it's not that I felt like I was misled. It's just that, when you hear of the pedigree of the directors that went there, you think, wow, this is going to be the cream of the crop, the ultimate, film school experience. We're going to be transformed from a fan into like this, visionary, which is so not the case. It's basically you go and you're there with a bunch of other kids who just want to party and drink beer and have fun and maybe pull out a camera every now and then and maybe shoot something for class. And then maybe like 10% of that group are serious and who really want to make movies. And that's the 10% I tended to gravitate towards, and a lot of them are still my friends to this day, over 20 years later. So it was interesting. It was very competitive. You know, it was a lot of arrogance, a lot of which came from myself. You know, I have to say, and it was humbling too, because you know you go in thinking you're going to be the next big thing, and you come out of there just destroyed, and like wondering what's my future. And it was a good experience to have, to sort of like, as Yoda says, you know, unlearn what you have learned. I feel like that was kind of a good thing to do. But I've made a lot of lifelong friends, and I made a lot of mistakes that hopefully I haven't made since. Yeah, it was also really great to just be at a film school that was so well connected to the industry, because I managed to land quite a few internships and, you know, lowly kind of production assistant type jobs through USC and through friends there, and that got me connected with all kinds of people in the industry, you know, beyond USC. And I worked at companies like Silver Pictures, Joel Silver's company. I worked a little bit at Lightstorm, James Cameron's company. Lucasfilm was my first time I worked with them as an intern. But ultimately, the company that I really clicked with was Scott Free, was Ridley and Tony Scott's company. And that's I became an intern there, and that became a script reading job, and then a story editor, and then just sort of like doing odd jobs here and there, and then that led to the DVD gig.
I'm just wondering if you weren't able to get a job at it's RCA, isn't it?
You mean RSA?
Yes.
Yeah, that's his commercial company. That's different than Scott Free.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. But if you weren't able to get the job at Scott Free, what other company would you've gone with?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I it's kind of funny. It's almost like going on a date, and sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't. And for some reason, the Scott Free date clicked, you know, and that became a long-term relationship. And the other ones were fine. And, you know, I didn't have, I always learned something from them, but I imagine I would have maybe gone on to other companies and explored, you know, other options. Looking back, if I could talk to my younger self 20 years ago, I probably would have encouraged him to stick to the directing, uh, you know, path a bit harder, because I was broke. You know, I had no money. I was coming out of film school with student loans, and, you know, really, really dire situation. And you're just desperate to get something going. And as much as I really wanted to direct, and I was pursuing that pretty aggressively, that was not paying the bills. And the reality of the situation kind of led me to the development job at Scott Free, and then eventually the DVD producing job, and that did pay the bills. So that kind of stabilized me and allowed me to, you know, live. But it also became an all-encompassing job for me, one that I loved and I embraced very, very strongly, obviously. But it definitely was a sidetrack that I was not expecting to take, and took me down a different path, which is, again, that's life, and that's great, and I don't regret any of it. But if I could go back in time, I'd probably say push harder on the directing and just try to struggle through those lean years more.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because obviously I'm sort of sat here green with envy, because you've worked with some of my absolute, you know, directing idols growing up. You know, certainly the likes of Ridley and Tony Scott. You know, not to mention a host of others. But yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to have for you. Actually, was you know, clearly the intention was to be a film director, which you've since done, which is great. But yeah, I wondered, you know, what sort of got you on the path of doing these documentaries, which we're really grateful, by the way, that you've done, because they're great. But I guess it was just an opportune meeting then, and exactly, you had to pay the bills, so that was kind of the way to go for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I it's funny because when I was interning for Lucasfilm, one of the kind of perks of the job was being able to go to Skywalker Ranch, and then they had like an intern day where the president of the company then, named Gordon Radley, he had like a luncheon with us where he kind of imparted advice and whatnot. And everyone there was asking, you know, how do we, you know, how do we do the next big thing that we all are dreaming of? And his advice to all of us was, you know, kind of let life lead you. You know, kind of don't resist the direction life is taking you in. Kind of embrace it and see what happens, because you might uncover something even more magical. And I sort of took that advice which was basically, you know, a couple years or 2 or 3 years after I think that luncheon was around the time the DVD started taking off. And it wasn't just the necessity of survival, of making money. It was also sort of like, well, this is this is interesting, and it's sort of like filmmaking. I mean, I still have to tell a story, and you still have to present a beginning, middle, and end, and you still have to create engaging characters. It's in the documentary form, and basically you're making movies about movies. So I followed that path, and that just seemed to be a natural way to go for a while, and it certainly was enough to make me enjoy life versus really just kind of getting out of it. Because that's the other thing about film school is like so many people that I know at the time who wanted to dearly, dearly make movies have now completely gotten out of the business or have no interest in pursuing film because they were just so you know taken on another path through life or circumstance or whatever. So again, it's like I don't regret having gone this DVD route, but it's I think it's an interesting sidetrack in what I still believe is a different path that I'm on. If that makes any sense.
No, it makes total sense. Absolutely. I mean, I when I left film school, I did an internship at Chapman Leonard Studios, thinking that was going to kind of lead to some stuff, and met a few people, but not really. So I hear you. On a practical level, then, when you make these documentaries, are you responsible for, as the producer of it? Do you do everything from the filming right the way through to the edit, or are you part of a team that do these discs?
It's different every time, to be honest. I don't think I've ever had the same experience twice on these projects. On some of them, it's me alone operating the camera from day one. On others, I have a big team, that are doing a variety of things. So it kind of depends on the needs of the project. I mean, case in point, like Prometheus, I was shooting early pre-production footage, probably a year or more before production even began, just on my own, because one of the biggest challenges of the Alien movies, especially the first film, Alien, is there's not a lot of behind the scenes footage available. Not like today where they shoot every day on set and you have, 3 different cameras and GoPros and everything covering everything. Back then it was probably just, 1 or 2 people with a 16 millimeter camera over the course of, a couple days here, a couple days there throughout the whole shoot. So you don't really have a lot to draw upon. And I know there's more footage out there, but the footage that Fox has is limited to what we've seen originally on the Laserdisc special editions, and then gradually over the DVD and then the Blu-ray releases. So I always think back, if I was a time traveler, could I go back to 1976 with a modern camera and just shoot the hell out of the making of Alien? What would I do? And that's how I approached Prometheus. Was I thought, well, okay, here's my chance to do that. So even if we're not officially a go documentary yet, or the Blu-ray or DVD extras haven't been figured out yet, I'm still going to start documenting, because once this stuff is gone, it's gone forever. So I just started documenting on my own for over a year out of my own pocket, just shooting. Ridley would have me come down to meetings, and I would just shoot things, and so that was me, like a one-man band, until we became an official crew with Fox, and then it became a little bit more robust in terms of how it was covered, and it was more of a traditional studio project. But the great part of that was I had all this early days footage that was very intimate, behind closed doors, and Ridley working directly with the artists and the writers. Just it was the kind of stuff that you don't normally get on a film. So that was kind of like the full spectrum of me as like a one man kind of camera operator, and then eventually overseeing a bigger crew.
What was your sort of favorite documentary to do, or disc to do?
That's such a difficult question, because they're all so different. I mean, I remember the one I had the most fun on originally was actually Hannibal, because that was the first one I was allowed to do solo. Before that, the studios were more interested in me teaming up with a more established producer, and just kind of being Ridley's eyes and ears and supervising and helping out. But Hannibal was the first time I actually got to do the whole thing, and that was a lot of fun. That was really almost intoxicating in terms of being able to finally jump into the game and play. But I would say since then, Blade Runner was certainly a huge one for me, because it's my favorite movie, and just being able to go every day through boxes and boxes of lost footage and all of these old elements that no one had ever seen since they made the movie, and then just getting to like interview so many of the cast and crew, just having such a broad exploration of my favorite film. I mean, that was like, it's like I tell everybody, it was like Christmas every day, you know, going to that. So I'd have to say Blade Runner was probably the most fun. But in terms of being on set, Prometheus for sure. Prometheus was the most fun being on set because that was like being on an alien set. You know, I mean, like those massive sound stages that had, you know, the derelict, or what's now called the Juggernaut ship with the space jockeys, aka the engineers, and or even the Prometheus itself. I mean, to be able to walk onto these beautifully made sets was like traveling through time and space. You know. So I mean, I can't pick just one. Is my short answer.
No, it's true. I'd try asking us what our favorite films are, and it's just yeah, there's so many to pick from.
Well, actually, while you were talking about Prometheus there, I grabbed my Blu-ray. I bought over in the UK. If you wanted all the special features, you had to get the 3-disc collector's edition that had the 3D version of the movie as well as the 2D. And I'm just curious, actually, I wonder how much of that is in the documentary that's on here, because I bought this version because it had more on it, and I have watched it, you know, back when I bought it. But yeah, I mean, you said that, you know, you shot, you know, hours upon hours of footage, so I just wondered how much of that process actually got through to the disc, or not. Whether you know that, you might not even know.
Well, I mean, I know what we delivered as our final product. It was just sort of you know, when you shoot documentaries, you know, you're shooting, you're overshooting, you know, because you need to you need to basically be ready for any moment that something amazing happens. You know, you need to be ready for the good and the bad. So you just roll and roll and roll, and you end up with literally just, you know, hundreds of hours of footage that you have to weed through, and then that you use that to serve your story. So, you know, in combination with all that footage you've shot, all that B-roll, then you shoot the interviews, and those are your storytellers. And then once you have them cobbled together basically into a narrative, then you go back to your B-roll and you use that to illustrate the points that are being made. So yeah, there's I mean, it's not just Prometheus. It's any documentary that I think I did or anyone else would do would have, you know, tons of footage that you wouldn't see in the final, you know, project. It's just that, you know, you have to cover that stuff just in case gold happens, you know. So in terms of the Prometheus set, I mean, I think the documentary is like 3.5 hours long, if I'm not mistaken, or it's pretty close to 3 hours. And
yeah,
then there's,
it's pretty impressive. Yeah.
and then there are all the, thank you. And then there are all the enhancement pods that kind of chase the documentary. So I think that's like another hour maybe. So all told, I mean, you're getting a pretty healthy amount of you know, documentary footage, even though no, it's nowhere near close to all the raw footage. And maybe maybe one day studios will release raw footage, almost like a subscription service, where you just go online and it's almost like you know, you're watching a surveillance camera, where you just watch raw, uncut footage of the set. But then of course there's no story really to go with it. You're just a voyeur.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to say that wouldn't be very interesting, because the thing I do enjoy about your documentaries is the fact that there is like a story, you know. It's the story about how the film came together, but it is a sort of complete story, and, you know, delving into, you know, some of the problems that happened on set and things that were overcome to sort of make the finished product. I mean, it was certainly good to see in the Blade Runner documentary that you didn't sort of skimp over the whole t-shirt wars or sort of any of sort of the problems they had on set.
Well, that's the juiciest material, and it's not juicy because it's, you know, wrought with conflict and anger and you know, drama and politics. It's interesting because it shows human beings, creative human beings, on their path to telling the story they want to tell, and how there's so many different opinions and so many different viewpoints that are often at odds with each other, and yet in that clash comes great art, and I think that's one of the reasons why Blade Runner is my favorite movie, is because you can tell that there was a filmmaker, you know, fighting for his vision, fighting tooth and nail to get that film on the screen, and I think for the most part he did. But then there's also the added dimension of the conflict that's in every frame of that film. You know, it's both compromise and the fight. You know, it's all wrapped up in this really intense experience. So when you start to unpack that and make a documentary out of it, it's a lot of really, I think, fertile ground to cover. And I felt like with Blade Runner we could do no less. I mean, Paul Salmon, who wrote the book Future Noir: The Making of Blade Runner, I mean, kind of set the tone for what kind of shoot Blade Runner was, and all the issues and all the drama and the conflicts. And if we were to have glossed over that, I think we would have completely failed. So from day one, I was out to embrace the drama, because look, it was at the time we made the documentary, it was 25 years earlier. So you hope those wounds heal enough that people will talk about it, and they did for the most part. And in fact, when I conducted the interviews for Blade Runner for Dangerous Days, people came back. We interviewed overall about 80 people for all of the Blade Runner extras, and I feel like people kind of came out of the woodwork, not just to set the record straight, but because they had pride in the movie, like what the movie had become over time, and they were happy to talk about it, even though, yes, it was some bad memories and it was a really difficult shoot. It's 25 years later, and people look back and they think, like, yeah, it was a tough shoot, but we made a classic film. So that's kind of the viewpoint. It's not to dig up dirt. It's mostly to kind of just put it to bed and have people's voices heard.
Well, certainly, we as crews, we always sort of love our war stories. We love talking about the shoots that went wrong, and rather the shoots that went well. But I was just wondering, did you get starstruck at all during any of these interviews for any of the documentaries?
It's rare, just because I've done so many of them, and ultimately, you're sitting there and you think, I have a job to do. And if you're conducting an interview, you're not only asking questions, you're also listening, and you're also kind of pre-editing everything in your head. You're kind of like buffering everything you're hearing, because you think, okay, I need this bit to tell this part of the story, and I didn't get that clearly enough, so I need to re-ask it in a different way. Or maybe you're learning something for the first time and you do a follow-up to try to get more information. So you're constantly factoring in all these things as you're talking to an A-list director or a megastar who are sitting 6 feet away from you. The only time I ever I think got truly starstruck was Harrison Ford.
Oh, right.
Well, because he was such a childhood movie hero of mine. When you're sitting there right across from Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and Rick Deckard wrapped into one guy, who, by the way, he's a formidable presence when he walks in the room. I mean, it's like that's a movie legend who just stepped in the door. And I remember one of the first questions I asked, and by the way, I go into this interview knowing that Harrison is a very straightforward guy. He doesn't he doesn't really carry these memories he doesn't cherish them the way movie fans do, right? For him, it's a job. He goes from one movie to the other, and he tries to do the best job he can. So I think we kind of started conversationally, just about Blade Runner in general and what we were hoping to achieve with the documentary and the final cut and everything. And we kind of joked and chit-chatted about other things, but for whatever reason, I asked a question that triggered a very long soundbite from him, a really long story about the recording of the voiceover. In fact, if you even watch the footage, you can see him set a glass down, because he was still kind of in casual, having a glass of water mode. And he sets the glass down and tells this really animated story about the, kind of the train wreck of the voiceover in Blade Runner, about the multiple recording sessions and the politics behind it. And I've never seen him this animated before, ever, about Blade Runner, because usually when you see him in interviews, he kind of mumbles yeah, it was a tough movie, and yeah, it was whatever. He doesn't really seem to engage, but he had a story to tell. So I just sat there in awe as he told this amazing story about recording the voiceover. And when it was over, I just stood staring at him, and all I could muster was, "Cool." That's all I could say. And then he looked at me and goes, "No, it wasn't cool. It was terrible." I feel like at that point, I realized, okay, I have to wake up and bring my A game, because I'm being a total, fanboy with him. And then the rest of the interview was perfectly fine and fun. But that first moment was when I realized, oh my God, yes, it is Harrison Ford, but yes, I also have a job to do.
Oh yeah, but I mean, just to hear that story, because I don't think he's talked about Blade Runner much, has he, in the past?
Not really. I mean, I think more and more since the 25th anniversary, because I think he fully recognizes it's one of his classics, and one of the films that grew into quite a beloved movie over time. So I think he's probably proud of it now, even if it was a tough shoot. And maybe I'm sure he still has issues about the Deckard as a replicant controversy, but I think he's probably embraced the love that the film now has.
Yeah. Now it's such a that one is such a comprehensive documentary. I mean, I remember I like to sort of between Christmas and New Year, I normally take those periods off work. And I remember one year I did the entire Alien quadrilogy, in between. And then the following year I did the Blade Runner set, with all the different cuts, and watched all your documentaries. And I mean, it literally is like there's no stone unturned. It's amazing the amount of information that's crammed into it. So we love that. Absolutely excellent stuff.
Well, thanks. I owe you a beer the next time I see you.
Yes. I might be on some of your B footage somewhere, because I was lucky enough. I did do a little bit of stand-in work on Prometheus.
Oh, yeah?
I was only covering someone, so I only did about 6 weeks on it in total. But yeah, I had to hold in the inner geek somewhat when I walked onto those sets, because, as you mentioned, I mean, the wonderful thing with that at Pinewood was, as opposed to everything being green screen and artificial and all that, with Ridley, everything was real, right down to the little details of the buttons on the control consoles and stuff, which totally blew me away, I have to say.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a very immersive set and world that was created there. I mean, the fact that they had to extend the Bond stage a bit further, like a third longer, I believe it was, to fit all that set in there. I mean, that just goes to show how big those sets were and how completely transportative they were. You really felt like you were on another planet. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I love that set so much, beyond the fact that I think the energy on the set was very positive. I mean, I think everybody there was so excited that Ridley was finally returning to science fiction, and they were so excited this was going to be an alien movie, but kind of in a new way. And just the fact that you're right, there was like not a lot of green screen. I mean, there was some here and there, but for the most part, those were fully constructed environments. So it was like a theme park. It was like the alien park at Disneyland or something. It was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't take any photos, though. I didn't want to lose my job or let anybody I was covering down. So the camera stayed away at all times. But yeah, it's all in the mind.
Well, I was surprised. I was surprised how little leaked out on Prometheus, because I know, obviously everyone signed an NDA and everyone was very respectful to Ridley, wanting to keep it, secret. But usually on a film of that nature, like a Star Wars film, for instance, I mean, there's always people on the lookout to sneak stuff out or get some kind of set photography or something. And Prometheus managed to go the full production with very little leaking out. I mean, there's the occasional photo of a piece of a set somewhere on the in the garbage or whatever, but it was very little got out, versus I think that so many other movies, you have people just leaking things left and right. So I was kind of surprised. I was talking to some of the other members of the crew, and we were always wondering, when's the first big leak going to come out, and it never did.
Well, I heard a story from a friend of mine who worked on the art department, and he was saying that on the first day there was a lot of tweets going out from people saying, "Oh, I'm working on Prometheus, I'm working on Prometheus," and the next day there was like a memo that went round that said the tweets must stop. Did you hear about that at all?
I didn't. I do remember, though, when they were shooting, there was those 4 or 5 viral pieces they did, and it was the day, I believe, when they shot Guy Pearce as young Peter Weyland doing his TED talk. And I remember there was one extra in particular who really went they crossed the line quite a bit in terms of tweets and photos and things, and it was kind of ridiculous. It was almost like this one person sort of felt like they won the lottery and they were in the biggest movie of all time. They're going to tell the world, and I think that person got shut down pretty hard. But besides that, I don't remember there being much in terms of leaks, because I know something everyone was very conscious about. I mean, even the sets had security at all times to make sure that there was no photography. I mean, a couple times I had to explain myself. I had the badge and I had the camera and everything, and finally they got used to me. But in the early days, I had to explain, who I was and what I was doing, which is kind of amusing.
Well, I think at Pinewood they foster an attitude that kind of thing is wrong anyway. I visited there just a month ago before, and they were getting geared up for episode 8, and the security there was really really high. But also I remember seeing like a TV, they had like their own TV channel, and there was always this like, do not take pictures, pictures ruin the industry, it doesn't help us. And it was constantly sort of there for everybody to sort of see that this kind of behavior wasn't on.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was at Pinewood for Exodus, and I had a lot of, I had friends who worked on Prometheus who were then working on The Force Awakens. And I mean, now that the film is out, I guess it's okay to say, I mean, the code name for the film was Avco when they were shooting. And I always thought that was interesting because if you're a serious Star Wars fan, you probably know, or at least a Los Angeles Star Wars fan like myself knows that it played at the Avco Theater in Westwood, and that's when I saw Return of the Jedi. But to me, it was like Avco wasn't the issue. It was the issue that they used the Star Wars font, like the title font, for the security, logo for their cards and things. And I thought, wow, I mean, you got all the trouble to have a secret code name, but then you use the Star Wars. And it's amusing because now, photos already come out from Episode 8 of, the Space Bear logo, and it's like it's a straight up Star Wars logo. So it's almost like they're not even trying that hard anymore because it's so top secret. Like even if they called it Episode 8, people would still, that the security measures at Pinewood are so tight. I don't think there's much to worry about, but that's part of the process is the games you have to play to keep people on their toes and keep the secrets in.
Well, I mean, it's for me. I'd been to Pinewood, back in the late 90s, and I remember going to pick up some lights for a shoot, and you just went through this old archway, and there was a security guard who just waved you in, and then I hadn't been for like over 10 years, and then so the last time I went, having to see this like airport security and everything was like, it was really threw me how much it's grown and how much security wise it's gone a lot tighter than it used to be.
Well, it's a whole new world too, because now that people are using drones to crash sets, basically, and now you have to have anti-drone drones to take the drones out. It's amusing. It's like you're having your own little your own little Star War there above the soundstage where you're knocking spies out of the air. But yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I have no doubt, like within our lifetimes, we as human beings will have like nano cameras in our eyes, and we'll be able to record everything we see, and therefore it's going to be a whole new level of security we're going to have to endure to even work.
Yes, it is madness, isn't it? Can we get on to your actual feature debut? You did a psychological thriller called Crave, which I guess, did you shoot that in 2009, was it? Because I noticed some of the dates on some of the stuff in the film was 2009, so I just thought you either said it in 2009 or shot it in 2009. So
it's funny, it's kind of both. We started in 2009, and then we finished shooting in 2010, and then we edited throughout 2011, and then we screened it in 2012. So around 2012, I almost thought about like the movie Witness came out in 1985, but there's a timestamp in the beginning of the film that says 1984. And I thought, maybe I'll pull a Witness, and even though it's 2012, I'll put a little timestamp that says Detroit 2009, just to kind of explain why there are things, like you correctly point out, say 2009. But then I thought, it's all right. Let's not worry about it. So, it's independent filmmaking, and it's really kind of guerrilla in terms of the financing and the shooting and getting the crew and everything together. So it took a while. We shot for about 21 days in Detroit in 2009, and we left Detroit minus one very critical scene, which we weren't able to pick up until July, I think it was, of 2010 in Chicago. So that right there, we were down for 8 months or 9 months between the Detroit shoot and the Chicago shoot, during which time we edited and we cobbled things together and we saw what we were missing. So it was kind of good, because then for that second shoot, we were able to get everything that was left over for the most part. But then it's basically you're asking people who have a day job to help you out in their off hours or weekends. That's why it takes a longer time when you're not dealing with a fully budgeted, full-fledged studio film that can just power through and get it done. I mean, we were limping along for literally years finishing that film.
Can I ask why you didn't go down the studio route, or was that not an option?
I kind of considered that a little bit. I just don't think it's that kind of movie, and frankly, it all came about. I mean, hopefully this isn't too long of a story, but it all came about because I was, and I still am. I mean, I've been working on this adaptation of a Philip K. Dick short story called "I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon," and my writing partner, Kalen Egan, and I had delivered a script that we were really happy with, and the Dick estate was very happy with, and a lot of people who read it thought it was great. But it's a big science fiction film, and even though we were at the time planning on it being sort of a District 9 level kind of like $30 million movie, even for a first time director, $30 million is still a lot of money in this day and age. So Issa Dick Hackett, Philip K. Dick's daughter, she asked me, would I consider doing a smaller film first, just to kind of prove that I can direct, and then that'll hopefully help with Arrive. And so I thought, sure, and I reached out to my neighbor at the time, who actually is a filmmaker, and his name's Robert Lawton, and he basically said, yeah, I've got an idea. It's Travis Bickle meets Walter Mitty. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so let's do that. And so we basically spent, months and probably over a year developing and getting that script together, and that became Crave. And the whole notion was to do something really lean and mean and cheap and just get it done. That was the plan. And of course, even that took forever. So it was almost like, it's not that we were trying to avoid the studio route, it's just that it began as such a small thing that eventually was much bigger than planned. And it's almost like we grew into almost like a studio level film, but from basically a homemade, let's go shoot on weekends type of, scope.
Also, it just sounds to me like you wanted to get it done quickly as well, so that you could prove that you could direct a feature.
Yeah, I mean, it was a glorified test movie, basically. And I think it certainly ended up as far more than that. But the notion was, let's just get it done. Let me kind of like lose my feature directing virginity and just get this thing finished. And the problem is, that's not the way things work. And on top of that, I'm pushing at every point to try to make it the best it can possibly be, and we're dealing with extremely limited resources. So that takes time, and Crave took time. But I think I learned a lot, and it was again another great educational experience where I learned what not to do. And next time, there's a lot of things I learned on Crave that I will not do again ever.
Could you give an example?
Well, this is going to sound maybe obvious, but I kind of felt with Crave, because it was my first feature, I wanted to learn from the people that I brought on, not just the crew, but also the actors, because I'd never done this before. But at the same time, you have to present kind of a level of authority as the director to basically make decisions and basically call the shots and tell people what movie you want to make. But by the same token, I also wanted people to contribute their own ideas, their own creativity, so we could have sort of we can create this sort of alchemy between all parties and come up with what I would hope would be a better movie. Well, I think next time I'm going to be far more clear and determined in what I want, which is not to say I'm going to become a dictator, but I do believe that I was a little too touchy-feely and a little too friendly with people and a little too, I don't know, human, for lack of a better term. And I think next time I need to be a little more strict and focused in what I want, because I think I was too much of a nice guy on this first one.
Right. I have to say, though, I watched it for the first time today, prior to this. And, I'm not just saying this, but I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was the sort of film that was right up my alley, as it were. But I have to ask, did you shoot some of it with multi-camera, or was it all single camera?
I'd say about 90% of the shoot was two camera. It was two Reds. And then there were a few sequences where we added a couple Canon 5Ds and 7Ds to shoot just like different angles. Like, for instance, the scene at the AA meeting when the guy gets his head smashed by the sledgehammer. We had a dummy on set with a head that had been put together almost like a jigsaw puzzle. So if the first take didn't go well, we could put it back together. It wasn't just like a oneer. We could go back and do a second take if we had to, because there were these these sort of tubes inside the dummy that would shoot blood out, and it created a huge mess. But if it screwed up, we can always do another take. Well, we didn't need to do a second take because we had four cameras. We had the two Reds, and then we had the two DSLRs on the side. So we had it pretty much well covered. But for the most part, it was two cameras, and that really saved us, because if it had been a one camera shoot, I'm not sure we would have been able to get the level of coverage and the detail in visual storytelling that we were able to with the two that we had. But then when we got to like the last couple of days, we were running out of money. Then it became like a one camera shoot. And then on the second unit stuff we did in Chicago, that was I believe that was one camera. We might have had a second camera. Actually, no, I think that was two cameras maybe. Yeah. But I mean, I know a lot of films at that level are usually a one camera shoot. So we were kind of lucky that we were able to have a bit more footage to draw upon.
Awesome.
What was the scene that you had to shoot in Chicago?
That was the opening train sequence.
Oh, okay.
Interesting story was, we shot the movie in Detroit, and all the locals were great and very supportive, and the local, government and the officials and the police were all really wonderful and supportive. And at the time, the state of Michigan had a pretty aggressive tax incentive to get films to shoot there. So you'd get a lot of money back, depending on how much you spent in Michigan. And the rebate that we got from Michigan actually paid for all of post-production. So because we shot there, we got basically, the whole movie covered. However, we did run into a problem with the train scene. A bureaucrat at the People Mover office read the script and apparently did not like the scene.
Oh, right.
How could they not like that scene? I mean, come on. But yeah.
Well, this person apparently didn't have a sense of humor about depicting gunfire and fellatio on a public transport. So we tried to explain, look, it's all in the main character's head. It's all fantasy. It's not really happening. We're not saying this stuff actually happens in Detroit, even though, Detroit has its own reputation. But we kind of thought, look, it's a fantasy. I'm sure plenty worse has been filmed in Detroit. Anyway, so we had previously been promised the use of their People Mover for like a Sunday. Like we were going to shoot on a Sunday the whole day. We'd have total control over it. We could move it, front and back, and be all ours to do with as we pleased. And I think we got the news maybe 2 or 3 weeks before that day was coming that we were running into problems with bureaucracy on this. And eventually, and even multiple people in the community and business owners and people who are trying to keep one more day of shooting in Detroit just to make some more money for the locals. Even with all that help, we got shut down. So we left Detroit minus that scene. And I spent the next several months trying to figure out, okay, is there a way to tell the story? Is there a way to start this movie off without that scene? But then I realized that scene sets up everything about the main character. And I thought, is there another form of transport? Could we do it on a bus? Could we do it on a ferry? Could we do it in this and that? And no, it really could only be a train, because realistically, a bus driver would stop the bus if that was happening, and thus the fantasy would, fall apart. Same with a ferry, same with an airplane. It's like there's no contained environment that would work other than the train, just the way it was conceived. So I brought on another producer, and we spent the next few months just trying to find a city that had an elevated train so we could see the outdoors. So it was a real train, not just a set, because we looked at sets and they were not convincing. And I even had a discussion with Tony Scott about it, because he was making his remake of The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 at the time. And I told him the situation, and he said, well, I could look into getting my, train set for you, but it's already in storage somewhere in New York, like in Queens or something like that. And it's going to cost $15,000 just to pull it out and look at it. So I thought, okay, well, we can't afford that. And I remember explaining to Tony the reasons why Detroit shut us down, namely the shootout and the blowjob. And he kind of looked at me with this sad expression, like, really? Like, what kind of world are you not allowed to shoot those things, So it was, so we tried for months till finally we went to a location expo here in LA, where the different film commissions from all over the world, I mean, we were looking at Czech Republic and Hungary, and we were looking at all these countries that might have had trains that we could shoot in. And finally, the last one we went to made the most sense, and it should have been the first stop we went to, which was Chicago. And they were so incredibly helpful and willing to help us out. Because I told the story, and they said, "Yeah, we will completely take care of you." So, and they did. So we got to use one of their. It was actually a 2-car train of theirs, which we went on the loop. What's called the Loop in Chicago. We just took the Loop all day long and just went in a circle. Ironically, at the same time, Transformers 3 was shooting. A few blocks away. So every few minutes you hear these 50 caliber machine guns firing, and it was really surreal, because at the time I was also working on Transformers 3, working on the behind the scenes of that. So I I went out to shoot my one day on Crave, and then the timing was so perfect. I just stayed in Chicago and then kept working on Transformers. So that really strange alignment of luck there.
No, I mean, that was a very good bit of luck. I just watched this recently as well, and I was sort of quite surprised with sort of how taken I was with it, because the whole idea of this guy living in his head, and the whole idea of that violence is an answer to everything, when really it's not. And I really liked that message, and I thought you did it in such a really good way. Though I did wonder, were you trying to get away from it being too ambiguous with what was fantasy and what was reality?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Originally, my idea was that I thought, like, the first half of the movie, let's say, I felt like I wanted to shoot the fantasy sequences as real for real, right? I didn't want it to feel like, oh, we're stepping out of the movie for a fantasy, because then I feel like the audience loses interest, because they thought, okay, well, what we're watching is not actually happening within the framework of the story. So I tried to keep it all pretty seamless. And then, later it becomes so obviously ridiculous that you have to kind of embrace that you're in a fantasy, and that's frankly why there's a turning point in the middle part of the film, after Aiden and Virginia have sex for the first time, and he's laying in bed, and then he kind of drifts off, and then you see it's actually hours earlier, when he was originally thinking about connecting with Virginia, and the audience, every time I've screened it, the audience went, oh, so they didn't really have sex, this love didn't actually happen. And that's when Aiden, in the alternate past, looks directly in the camera and says, no, Aiden, this time it's real, and then we snap present. That was my way of telling the audience, like, look, we don't know what's real and fake, and I want to keep you guys guessing the rest of the film. So that was kind of like a nice way of winking at the audience to say, we know we're dealing with fantasies, but we're not always sure. We're going to tell you that it's a fantasy, and that's why at the end, in the third act, all that stuff blurs together. I mean, you could say, okay, this is ridiculous, there's no way this could be happening, but we don't really address it, and we never pull out of it, because I feel like at that point Aiden's brain is broken. And let's just enjoy that broken brain for a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly. I mean, spoilers for anybody who hasn't watched it, but the bit with Edward Furlong's character popping out of a body bag and clapping is certainly, I have to say, as a brilliant touch. I thought that was really good, well done, especially the thumbs up, because it was so creepy.
And we tried that thing about 20 different ways too. It's like it took forever to land on something that I felt worked, because Eddie Furlong was fantastic to work with, by the way. I mean, he came into this with a slightly tarnished reputation of being, difficult and having some personal problems. I have to say, he was an absolute sweetheart on set. He was so easy to work with and a lot of fun, and always brought like something new to every take. I mean, it was almost like I just wanted to keep shooting with him, because everything was new every time we tried something. So when we did the body bag gag, I mean, every appearance out of the body bag was something different. So we had, I forgot, like 7 or 8 takes of him doing different bits of like really crazy over the top stuff, and then really kind of like not kind of more creepy and subdued. And it took a while in editing to figure out what was the right way to end that scene, because on the other hand, it's not just Eddie, because Eddie's kind of like the punctuation mark of that story. It's basically Aiden completely losing his mind because he's so crazy in love with Virginia. So when we kind of drift off into this dreamy, kind of like cascade of light as they're like falling in love or whatever, and then we hard cut to Eddie coming out of the body bag, it's like, how do you juggle, those two emotions so close to each other? I mean, you're shifting gears pretty hard from one to the other, Yeah.
I mean, for myself, I could certainly tell, because your use of light was really really well done, in the fact that it was telling when it was kind of a fantasy, if we were starting to sort of see it, the lights invade the screen.
That's right. I mean, yeah, like basically, the more lens flares, the more you should, question whether it's happening.
You were channeling J.J. Abrams there, yeah. But
it's funny, because when we shot that, it was before Star Trek had come out, and at that point, I hadn't really, kind of clocked J.J. Abrams as a guy who loves flares as much as he does, and I think I tweeted on the last day of shooting something like, my lens flares will kick J.J.'s lens flares' ass, or something like that. And I don't mean that because I actually love lens flares, and I think they have become a bit of a cliche, but I do think that there's value to them. And in Crave, it was mostly, if you watch the film, lens flares usually play a part when Ron Perlman is on screen, because I was trying to convey, it's my own little Deckard's replicant thing. It's basically, is Ron Perlman actually there? And
Yes.
there's a scene when they're at the diner, Aiden and Pete are talking, and Pete asks for a glass of water, and the waitress comes back and she puts the glass of water in front of Aiden, not Pete. And Aiden's like, "Why'd you give me water?" And I remember that was my whole notion of, well, because Pete's not there, Aiden asked for the water, so the water goes in front of Aiden. And when we shot the first take of that, I didn't tell Ron. I didn't want him to know because I wanted him to act truthfully as Pete in the real world. And we had finished that take, and Ron was like, "Well, that take was shit." I'm like, "What was wrong?" He said, "Well, they put the water in front of Josh, not me." And then I told him what I had in mind, and he's like, "Oh, okay. I wish you had told me." And I said, "No, I don't want you to know. I don't want you to acknowledge that that's a thing." So it was kind of funny, like the way we had to play little games like that on set.
Well, I mean, I think one of the reasons Crave works so well actually is because, in terms of what's real and what isn't, and the sort of track in between that, the fact that it is not absolutely obvious with everything, I think is one of the strengths. I think had you been more obvious with it, it wouldn't have been so engaging and so interesting. But I mean, I really did like the bit where he did break the fourth wall and do that bit in the car where he says, "No, this is real." I thought that was a nice touch. But in terms, I mean, you've obviously mentioned your two sort of main names in it, Edward Furlong and Ron Perlman. I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about the casting of this in general and how you sort of got them involved, and a little bit about Josh and Emma as well.
Yeah, well, it's funny because every time I think that any filmmaker, and I'm sure you guys would agree that when you have your dream project and you want to get it made, you start thinking of your dream actors, and like you start dream casting in your head of all the actors in the world who would play these parts, even if I can't afford them, who would play these parts. And we went through a bit of that, and eventually I came up with a more realistic list of like indie film friendly actors who I thought might work. And I guess I probably should mention names, but I mean, I actually got my first choice for one of the parts, and then that actor unfortunately had to bow out later, which really killed me. It was like crushed me that I had my number one choice. But eventually, we started running out of time. The crew was already in Detroit. We were already like the LA part of the crew was already in Detroit at the hotel, and we were still casting. And that was kind of like one of my biggest headaches was. The producer on the film that was, supposed to be handling that was kind of, taking a bit of a slower pace, shall I politely say, in terms of getting the cast together. So, we were like literally just weeks away from shooting, and I'm freaking out because we don't have any of those four leads cast. So eventually, Josh Lawson, who I didn't know at the time, and who I first saw him in an unreleased U.S. remake of the Simon Pegg show Spaced. They were doing a U.S. remake of that, and I saw Josh was the lead in that. He played the Simon Pegg role in the U.S. remake, so that was the first time I ever saw Josh, and I thought, well,
oh yeah, because they're so alike, aren't they?
Yeah, I know. But that's the thing. It's like one is Americanized, the same way that like like the UK office versus the US office, So it was just weird to like see. Okay, my main guy, who is psychotic, broken, really dark and edgy and weird, is going to be played by this really upbeat, funny, smart, witty blonde dude, who's in the Space remake. So I kind of came to Josh at first sort of thinking, wow, he's not really what I had in mind. And then I actually spoke with Josh. He called me from Australia, and we had a wonderful phone call where he conveyed to me not just that he got it from a character point of view, he got it from a writing standpoint, from a directing standpoint, because I mean, he's a writer and director himself who recently made his feature debut with The Little Death, which is a wonderful film, which I highly recommend. Very funny, very smart, and Josh is very funny and very smart. So he approached it as seriously as I was approaching it, and he really had some great ideas. So I thought, okay, well, this makes me more comfortable. And then he put himself on video. He recorded like I forget, it was like 3 scenes from the script. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, okay, this could work. I mean, and not only could it work, it could be really more interesting than I originally imagined, because Josh brings just this inherent likability and humanity to the character that I was originally seeing as a monster. You know, I originally saw Aiden as a really kind of damaged piece of humanity.
He's very relatable. I mean, you know,
right.
I mean that is like an amazing plum role for an actor. I mean that's it's a great role to have, because it's got so many elements to it. But he's also, you know, he is very much the everyman as well, and very relatable. So yeah, I think he was a really good choice.
Well, I think comedians often make great dark dramatic characters. I mean, I think Robin Williams has done a few. He did a few roles, like 1 Hour Photo, for instance. I think where he plays a very, very dark character, but coming from an actor who the world knew as a top comedian. So I thought,
yeah, I agree.
Josh's comedy chops only help things, because then you're never really sure who you're dealing with, because you got this likable guy who obviously can connect with you, but you're not sure you want to be connected to this guy, because he's definitely got some issues. So anyway, so Josh came on board, and we flew him out, and so we had our Aiden, and then there's this process of kind of de-prettifying him, because I mean he was like such a nice looking guy. I mean he's so like handsome and rugged, and I wanted to like downplay that, so I made him look more like me. Gave him that. I told him, put on some weight, start eating pizza, and just like grow a nasty beard, and we'll darken your hair, and we'll kind of mess you up a bit. So that was Josh. And around this time, the script started floating around to different agencies, because the word got out that there was this film that's going to shoot soon, and we're looking for actors desperately. So then suddenly agents were approaching us with their actors, and this one agent at UTA, Louise Ward, really took a liking to the script, and she was just trying to plug all of her clients into it. So Emma Lung was with her, and joined us through Louise. So and Emma is interesting, because not only is she incredibly talented and smart and beautiful and funny, but she also bears an interesting resemblance to what I will call the real world inspiration for that character, because there are elements in Crave that are based on my own history. I'll put it that way. And in some ways, if Aiden is kind of like the fractured alternate universe of me, Virginia is the alternate universe version of a real person that I had in mind for this part, and Emma kind of looks like that person a bit. So I thought that was an interesting, again, lineup of luck. And then when it came to Ron, it was the same thing. It was sort of like, well, we know we wanted an actor with some kind of name value, and because I was going to be like the anchor to the marquee, sort of like actor 1, 2, 3, and Ron Perlman as Pete type of thing. We knew we needed that sort of person. So we looked at a lot of different character actors and considered a lot of different people, and ultimately boiled down to who was available, who could we afford, and who was interested in doing it. And Ron was on a short list of about 8 people. And then when you get down to that 8, you look at, well, who's really best for the role. And I thought Ron would be a great fit, because he just has that streetwise, edge to him, and that face that just has like 1,000 stories behind it. And he's such a consummate professional. He's a total vet who just knows he's going to come in and knock it out. So he did.
I just wanted to sort of, as you touched on the relationship between Aiden and Virginia, and do you think it's, because I sort of, it rang a bell with me as well, and just as a filmmaker, you do kind of get into these relationships where at first they're quite excited because you're a filmmaker, and then afterwards when they find out what the reality of that is like, that they're not so keen. Do you think that kind of was in that sort of part of the film?
That's an interesting question. At the time, I didn't really even consider that, or that didn't seem to be an issue at the time. And now that I look back, maybe it might have been. But the big thing for me was not just in terms of the writing, there's also in terms of like dealing with the actors for the relationship part of it, was just that I had my own baggage that I just needed to deal with, and I felt it wasn't just therapeutic. I also felt like it would help the story, because originally it was conceived as kind of almost like a canon 80s style, vigilante movie, you know. And in retrospect, that might have been a more clear way to sell the movie, is to make it more of a straight up vigilante movie. But because I was dealing with all of these relationship issues at the time, I felt like it would make it more interesting. Like it would give it a little more nuance, a little more humanity, a little more character, and it wouldn't just be a kick-ass, you know, this and that film. It'd be more about people. So at the time, I was just following my instinct. Really, I hadn't even intellectualized it in any way. I just thought, oh, this is better for the movie, you know. And now looking back, I you know, it's been a while, and a lot of different things have happened in my life since then. So I'm just glad I got it out of my system, because it was kind of nagging at me for the longest time, and now I feel like I'm completely divorced of that chapter in my life, and I think it really helped the movie.
Yeah, all I'm going to say is yes, and I thought Emma was great.
But I mean, if it had been an 80s canon style film, I don't think it would have longevity. I think it might have just been one of those films that comes along, it makes a bit of money, and then goes away. I think the one of the great things about the film is the fact that you have this central relationship, and that you do care about these two characters.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you're saying that, because that to me is what allows me to sleep at night. And because, I mean, you know, it was, you know, Crave did not make, you know, $100 million. It didn't make, you know, a fraction of that, but it was sort of like nice to make a film that I feel proud of, you know, and a film that kind of like satisfied multiple facets that I was hoping to explore, with not just the making of film, but just my own stuff, you know, my own inner world. And I feel like a lot of that came out in Aiden. I mean, Aiden's inner monologues, all of his voiceover. I mean, that's the way I think a lot. I mean, I'm sure other people do. Other people have told me, God, that's just how I think. And I feel like when I'm driving along and I'm rehearsing a meeting I'm about to have, or I left a meeting and it didn't go as well as I had hoped, and I revise it in my imagination to think, God, if only I had done this. I have like this inner dialogue with myself. And I thought, why not use that style of writing for the voiceover? So that was a lot of fun to write and to capture. And the whole thing with like the Bill Gates thing, I mean, that's really from my own shtick in my own head, where I'm like thinking, God, if only Bill Gates would just give me $1 billion, everything would be fine, you know? And
well, I did love Bill Gates' cameo in it. I thought that was a really lovely touch.
Yeah.
I wish I could. I didn't want to release it in the behind the scenes extras, but there's an earlier take where the actor who's playing Bill Gates, you know, the camera pans from the redhead with her, you know, her top is off, and we pan over to Bill Gates, and the first take, that actor is completely just looking at the actress. He's just staring at her boobs, and that was pretty funny to see Bill Gates, you know, quote unquote Bill Gates, not the real Bill Gates. Just like checking out this actress,
yeah.
But
you can't blame him, to be fair. But no, I know, Charles, you're not crazy. I think we all have those inner monologues and cravings. I know I, for one, definitely do. Someone else in the cast that I think also deserves some mention, because he's wonderfully sort of unlikable, is it Christopher Stapleton, the guy who played Barry? Is that right?
yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I thought he played that, you know, sleazy and unlikable, just as he was supposed to be. There was one point where I was wondering if he was actually a real character or something in the imagination as well. You know, there was that sense of ambiguity there as well in places, I felt.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting theory. I always felt that he was real, because in a way he's the one that he's kind of like the gateway to Aiden leaving the world of just a wannabe, and then be actually taking action and becoming the vigilante, the quote unquote hero he's always dreamt of being, because it's because of Barry and what Barry's doing. So it always was meant to be this sort of like transitional character that would help Aiden into this new world. So I never really thought of him as a fantasy character. I always felt he was real. But now that I look back on it, that could have been an interesting thing. It's just that at some point you need to have the reality of the character's actions and the consequences of those actions actually take place, you know, in the world that you've created. And you can't just have everything in his head.
No, well, I thought he was real at the beginning. I mean, obviously, all of the thing, you know, where he sees him at the wedding and then follows him and all that. I thought that was real. When I started to question it was when he confronts him later, and you have the whole scene about the watch and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, hold on, could this be in his head, or is this real? And I mean that's one of the reasons it works, I think, because you have got a bit of that.
I don't know. I disagree with you, Keith. I thought that was real. I mean, the whole bit with the watch and taking it to the shop, and the guy's going, "Well, you haven't got a receipt," and it's somebody in your position, you know. I thought was very realistic.
Yeah, but it's when he turns up. It's later, isn't it? It's not the watch, but there's a bit beyond that, isn't there, where he turns up. There's
a bit at the end, but even then, I knew that was just in his head. That was like the devil and the angel on his shoulders.
We did an interesting thing with the audio, by the way, in that final bit in the car with Barry and Eddie's character and Aiden, which is, you know, you record, you know, sound obviously on set. You have your production sound, and then if you need to clean it up, you go into the studio and you record ADR. You loop the lines to get it more clearly. What we did, we did all that, but then we went one step further, and we had Josh record their lines as well. So if you listen really carefully, there's this strange kind of like echo to all the dialogue in that car, where everything that Eddie says, it's Eddie with the production sound, it's Eddie slightly out of sync in ADR, and then Josh slightly out of sync with his own ADR. So it's like all these voices, these three voices blend into one that has almost like the audio DNA of Josh. So it's in Josh's head. It's in Aiden's head, basically. So all that dialogue has Josh as like this weird echo mixed in. So you think it's possibly in his head. And that was a lot of fun to try, like, to play games like that in post. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, the mix on it was great. I actually listened to it on headphones, and one of my thoughts of it was the sound mix is really good on this, you know. So yeah, it worked.
Yeah, that was really tough, because again, that's one of those things where, you know, the independent director in me, actually to rephrase it, the independent producer in me was fighting with the quote unquote big time feature wannabe director in me, because, you know, I've had the fortune of witnessing these huge A-list directors work, and so I think, oh, that's how everyone does it. I get to have, you know, 6 weeks of a mix, or, you know, whatever it is that, you know, a mix takes, and it's like, you know, that you're working on independent budget, and suddenly it's like, well, what would normally be 6 weeks is really only a week, you know, or 2 weeks, and suddenly you're pushing for all this perfection that, you know, unfortunately you can't afford. So that was always the dilemma, because people wanted to give me what I wanted, but there was the reality of the situation that they were giving us a deal, or they were squeezing us into a schedule, and, you know, that was one of the many lessons I learned, is I need to know what I'm working with. I can't just go in with a blank check, you know, and assume that I can just get everything. But I think a lot of directors would tell you that maybe it is better to go in with that, because then you come out with more no matter what. Even if you only have $10 to spend, you come out with $100 worth of value. And so maybe I should just do that always. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens on the next one. I don't
know. One of the things I wanted to ask about as well is, I mean, you've got some incredibly gory scenes in this film, and I just wondered how much of it was practical, how much of it was CG, or whether it was a mixture of the two. I just wonder whether you could talk a bit about that.
Well, we shot it with the intention of it all being practical. I mean, that was the absolute intention, just because I didn't want to, first of all, spend the money. I also don't believe digital, especially at that level, is usually convincing. Keeping in mind, this was back in, you know, between 2009 and 2011 when we were doing this, and visual effects have, you know, exponentially come so much further since then. You look at a show like The Walking Dead, which has a lot of digital blood, a lot of digital gore, and, you know, you can kind of still tell, but it's gotten so, you know, so convincing that you kind of let it go. You don't nitpick it. Whereas back when I was doing it, and given that we had a low budget, it was much harder to pull off. So we tried practical, and we kind of got, like, I would say maybe 60% there, 70% there in terms of it being convincing. But we knew that in post we were going to have to digitally paint out certain things or add other elements. The AA meeting, for instance, you know, we had this very kind of like fake looking dummy, but I realized I only needed it for the actual, like, you know, 3 or 4 frames that the sledgehammer hits the skull, and then we would transition from the real actor to the fake skull, and then it would just be a geyser of blood. fortunately, I had made some friends working on the Blade Runner Final Cut and working on the Alien anthology set that were all extremely talented artists, either as visual effects or title design. In the case of Raleigh Stewart, who was kind of like my hero on this project, Raleigh designed the Blu-ray menus for Alien Anthology and Transformers 2 and 3, I think. And so a lot of the projects I've worked on, I always try to get Raleigh on because he's a kind of a genius. And he also did the title design for Crave. And while we were working on it, I asked him, I said, I've got about like 60 or 70 shots that are problem shots that need fixing or need some help. And he said, well, yeah, let me take a crack at it. So he started with about 5 or 6 shots and completely not only salvaged them, made them so much better. And so I kept feeding him shots. And I feel like by the time we were done, he must have done about 60 or 70 shots, visual effect shots, never having done it before, and incredibly convincing. I mean, and he would fix all kinds of problems that we had just because we were rushed. And he would add things that we needed. For instance, in Aiden's apartment, for whatever reason, we had to build a fake wall and a front door to Aiden's apartment because we needed to create the illusion that there was a hallway outside of it, which wasn't there at the actual location, because the hallway portion we had shot at an entirely different apartment across town in Detroit. So we had to like stitch these 2 locations together into one. So we created a fake hallway outside the door of Aiden's apartment. For whatever reason, whether it was no time or no money or whatever, someone in the art department thought that a bathroom door would be sufficient as the front door to an apartment in a bad part of Detroit. And if you're in a low rent apartment in a bad neighborhood in Detroit, you're going to have all kinds of safety chains and locks and deadlocks and all that stuff, right? And I'm looking at the dailies and I see this little teeny tiny puny little door, like door handle, and nothing else on this front door. And I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. So Raleigh went in and digitally added in a new knob, a lock, like a deadbolt, and he made it look like a real front door. So, but that's the type of thing you would never ever notice, And Crave is filled with that type of invisible little fixes that if you had seen the film raw, you would say, oh, that looks a little dodgy. That doesn't look very good. We had some shots because we were shooting 2 cameras where the other camera got into the shot. Raleigh painted all that out. He either took out mistakes or he put in fixes over about, I'd say, 70% of all of our quote-unquote problem shots. So yeah, we started with the idea of being practical, but just we needed to rely on digital at some point just to fix all those little glitches.
Well, no, I mean, it's digital is very good for that. I mean, it's when you just think that digital can fix everything, especially stuff that the human eye can pick up. Because tell the truth, all that stuff you talked about, apart from the shot with the hammer, I didn't pick up at all. I mean, I knew with the hammer shot there had to be some sort of digital manipulation to it to cut from it being a live person to whatever sort of dummy or effect that you had. But it was really well done. Just because I only noticed it because, I think it was my filmmaker's eye, but I think to everybody else, they would just think it was, wow, they actually caved that guy's head in.
Yeah.
A snuff movie.
It was funny because on the set, when we actually all sat around and, watched it, and, Ron was there and Josh was there, and we were just all watching this dummy about to get its head smashed in, and we were all thinking this could be the worst thing ever or it could be fun, and it was the worst thing ever. It looked terrible on set, but it was almost like a Monty Python gag because just the hydrant of blood that came out was so comical. I mean, actually, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of that one sketch for Monty Python, Scott at the Antarctic, and like the whole fight with the lion, I think it is, and there's like that one little spew of blood that comes out of its belly. I don't know if you remember that. It was like that cheesy. It was so unconvincing when we first saw it. So this guy, Kelvin McElwain, who I met on Blade Runner Final Cut, who actually was the digital matte painter on the final dub shot that we did in Blade Runner, he's the one who went in and fixed all those headshots of making it look convincing and adding some blood, and he actually threw some drops on the fake CG blood drops in the lens, which is now a big cliche, but at the time we thought it was kind of cool. But yeah, it was just a lot of finessing what as we waited to finish the film, I thought, well, let me see if some friends can help out and just add some magic to everything, and that's what happened.
It certainly did.
Absolutely. I've got to ask Charles, okay, saw this on Netflix because it's not available to buy here in the UK. However, you can get the Region 1 DVD of it on Amazon. And I've got to ask, are there any extras on the DVD?
There are, but there's even more on the Blu-ray. So if you can,
Hey!
if you can somehow find the Blu-ray, the North American Blu-ray, that has all the extras on it. It's got commentary. It's got like an hour making of. It's got half an hour deleted scenes. It's got that play, that terrible play they go see. It's got the full uncut version of the play with like act breaks and everything.
That was brilliant. Yeah. Well, I'll be buying the Blu-ray when I come out to the States later this month. Then I guess.
Oh, good luck finding it. Good luck finding it. You might have to like come to my house and I'll have to slip the copy because it's really hard to find.
Was there any plans to sort of release it worldwide? Because as Keith said, I had to watch it on US Netflix to see it, and I was puzzled to think why this film is not available in this country.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's just, again, that I have to chalk that up to lessons learned. When the Crave came out, it premiered at the Fantasia Film Festival in Montreal, and right off the bat, I was approached by some distributors, and then the film won Best First Feature at Fantasia, and then it went to Fantastic Fest in Austin, and I won Best Director in the first feature category. So it had a nice launch, and suddenly I was approached by all these distribution companies. Now, I was not familiar with a lot of these companies, and you would go onto their websites and you'd look at the absolute dreck they're releasing. I mean, really garbage movies. And I'm thinking, well, I don't want my movie to be on the same shelf as Atomic Pigs from Plan whatever. It's like I don't want to be on it's just you don't want to be in that group. But amongst those, there was probably like 5 or 6 companies that are actually really good companies, and I guess I just waited too long, because then I went to Sitges, the film festival there outside of Barcelona, and I was waiting to see what the European response was, and I guess I spent like a year. Just traveling for like a year and a half, traveling the world to festivals, and by the way, that is incredibly time consuming. When it's just you, and you're out there like coordinating with festivals, and then traveling to go support them, and then doing all the Q&As and the press at every single festival, and then to find the time to like do the research on distributors and the whole like paperwork they have to do, and then on top of that, you really have to be a completely like obsessed machine to chase down all the money that's out there, because you may make a deal with a distribution company and they may say, oh yeah, you'll get X number of dollars here, and you'll get X number of percentages points here, and I almost feel like that you're just giving your movie away no matter what. I mean, you have to spend almost as much money chasing the money to make it even remotely worth your while. That it's just not worth it. I mean, it is, and it's ridiculous for me to like just give up the movie, but I really feel like I needed a producer who could have handled that, and I just unfortunately didn't have that on this movie. So it was just, again, lessons learned, and next time I will not be doing that. So the short answer is basically that it did get some distribution in some territories, like Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, and I think Sky TV has it, but otherwise it was just North America. And that's kind of it. And I've spoken with people since, like distributors that have thought about picking it up now to release it, because my notion is, well, look, if it hasn't been released in a territory, it's still effectively a new film. But they're trying to draft any sort of buzz from the festival circuit, and that's long gone. So, it's one of those things where I'm certainly open to other possibilities with the film. It's just that right now I feel like I want to focus on the next one, and I'll just chalk this one up to inexperience.
No, I know what you mean. I didn't have as many distributors coming up to me with my own feature film, but I remember the experience of looking at some of the websites of the ones that did, and it's like, they look so low rent that you go, bloody hell. But then in the end, the ones I did send it to, they all turned it down because It was one of those films that you just couldn't stick into
Right.
like a pigeonhole. You know, it wasn't because it was horror, but it wasn't out and out horror. It was a sort of drama horror hybrid. They didn't quite know what to do with it. I mean, I got some great notes, especially from Ghost House Underground, where they said, we love it, we just don't know what to do with it. So I ended up having to self-distribute it in the end.
Well, if you'd like to take over distribution on Crave for the rest of the world,
well, the thing is, my film is only available in the US. It's not even available in my own country. It's just I think the mechanics for self-distribution in the UK is just not there
I
yet.
mean, this is the problem, isn't it, folks? If making the movie itself isn't hard enough, that is actually just the tip of the iceberg, because you know, if you haven't got a major studio or anything involved, then yeah, it's tough getting it seen, isn't it, and getting it out there. So well, who knows? Maybe people are listening to this and go check it out.
Maybe. I mean, it's like I mean, not that I'm a marathon runner, far from it, but I imagine a marathon runner, you know, they realize how long the race is, and they try to, you know, measure out their energy and their pace, and just try to like keep their eye on the prize of that finish line. And I think with a filmmaker, when you're making a movie, it's like a marathon. But then it's almost like you get to the finish line, and then someone tells you, oh, no, there's actually a second finish line a mile down the way, which is the distribution part of it. And you're like, wait, I spent all my energy just getting to this first finish line. Now you're telling me I have to go a whole other mile. And it's like, that is what I wasn't quite prepared for this first time. So next time I'll just ignore the first finish line and just focus on that final one, because man, that was really tough to basically get together every little bit of energy I could to get the film ready for Fantasia, which we finished. I mean, we finished the film literally 48 hours before it was going to premiere there, and we shipped the DCP up to Montreal. Like, just, it was completely, as they say, wet. It was so barely finished when I got up there. So and you'd think, okay, well, now I can just enjoy it with an audience. And at the time, I wasn't honestly expecting the film to have much of a reaction. I thought it would just be a stepping stone to the next film. But then when it actually did get, you know, some awards and some really good reviews, that began this whole process of other festivals reaching out to me. And then suddenly I'm traveling like for a year and a half with the movie, which I was not expecting to do. Again, it's a first world problem. I'm not going to complain. It's fine. But again, it was just sort of like the inexperience kind of caught me off guard.
Well, I think I know now this, because there's a lot more podcasts out there with filmmakers who talk about, you know, this sort of problems. I think a lot of first-time filmmakers now kind of have a lot more information about that than, say, back in 2007 when I shot my film. So yeah, it's sort of, it's this thing now where you have not only to think about the film, but you have to think about how you're going to get the film out there, what your strategy is, not just out doing festivals, but screenings, or are you going to go straight to VOD, or it just, you have to think now much further, and the whole thing of finding a distributor who takes care of that is kind of gone now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's you're right. It's a completely different world, and even, you know, again, when Crave was happening, I'm sure with your own film, it was around that time when it was a crossroads. I mean, it still is, but I feel like that's when our traditional notion of theatrical distribution, which I think any filmmaker, you know, always dreams of, is going to play in like 1,000 screens or 3,000 screens or whatever around the world, and everyone's going to come to the theater to watch your movie. I mean, I hate to say it, I just think those days are kind of gone. I mean, for independent level filmmaking, I feel like it is really all about the VOD, you know, and it's almost like a theatrical run is almost a waste of money. Crave had like 2 theaters it played in just so that it would qualify for the now, you know, in theaters now box on your VOD or on demand menu. You know, I mean, Crave was lucky because, you know, they always want your the first letter of your title to be, you know, early in the alphabet, so you're higher in the ranking, you know. And so I was in the C's, which was all right. But because it played in 2 screens, for, like, by the way, just 1 screening at each, there's 1 in Ohio and then 1 here in LA, that qualified it for the in theaters now section. So that bumped it up to a higher level of exposure. But you realize that's kind of where we're at now. Unless you're making, Guardians of the Galaxy or Star Wars or something, you really can't count on a theatrical release making you any serious money.
Yeah, you have to be something like paranormal.
Paranormal Activity.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it escaped my mind. Yeah, that it has to be like a massive hit of like Blair Witch proportions.
And even those days are gone. I mean,
Yeah.
that's you look at like Blumhouse, which is the company behind the Paranormal Activities movies, and they have this really elegant production model of, they don't spend more than 5 million on a movie, and if the movie's good, they'll release it theatrically. If it's not good, it'll go straight to VOD, and they have no problem with that. It's like whatever is the best home for the movie when it's done is where they'll put it, and that goes completely against my old way of thinking, which was no, it's all about the theater. It's all about the old school style of let's put on a show and let's put a movie in a theater and get people to show up. And now the new version of me is like, hey, I'm just happy if somebody sees it and pays for it and it doesn't get pirated, and I can make a movie. I'm just happy to be here.
Exactly. I mean, we make these films for people to see, and so and also I think it's not so much a stigma now to be straight to VOD as it was with straight to video.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And plus the fact that television in general is so amazing these days. I mean, we are in this golden age of TV that more and more people are just investing in a really nice home theater, and they're staying in, and they're either binging on various TV series, or they're watching movies, and a lot of that's coming off of Netflix and other portals. So yeah, it's a new world that I feel like such an old man that I have to adjust to it. But I really, if you're going to survive, you have to, and I feel like that's the whole new way of thinking. And in fact, I've pitched feature projects that have then come back to me. I mean, for instance, like the Philip K. Dick one I mentioned earlier, that went around town and got really great coverage from different production companies. But one big one actually came back to us and they said, look, we don't really want to do this as a feature because it's not based on an existing title or IP, but what would you consider making it a TV show? And that really got us thinking, like, wow, there might be this whole new dimension we have to consider whenever we pitch a project, that it's not just a 2-hour movie. It might have to be like a 7-season show, and how do we pace that story out in that kind of a way, And that's the whole new level of conversation that happens on a regular basis now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way it's all going, most certainly. Yes.
I mean, is it a story that could be turned into a TV series?
I mean, it could. It just wasn't envisioned that way. So we're going to have to kind of like take it back to the drawing board a bit and rethink it. I think the concept could work over the course of a TV series. It's just that how do you keep it interesting week to week, and what are the new discoveries each week? Because, serial narratives are all, where it's at now. And it's not just like the old days of just, mystery of the week. You need to pace this out. You need to know when you're going to reveal certain things in what was originally your 2-hour story. And now you're developing like 13, 14 hours of material each season. So that times, 5, 6, or 7 seasons, whatever you're planning. I mean, you really have to think the long game here.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new conversation,
Did you catch The Man in the High Castle?
Yeah, I did. And actually, my writing partner on I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon, Kalen Egan, he's one of the co-executive producers of Man in the High Castle. So I've been, very interested in how that's been going. And he's told me quite a bit about the making of that show. And it's just really interesting to see how you take what's kind of like a finite story in literary form, and then develop that into an ongoing, episodic drama.
Especially no spoilers, please, Simon.
No, yeah.
I wasn't.
I know what you're like. No, I mean, this whole speculative fiction stuff is really quite intriguing, isn't it? It seems to be the thing of the moment, which I must admit, it's on a long list for me of ones that I want to watch. Definitely, yeah.
Well, it's a very compelling situation and interesting world that High Castle, I think, is exploring. And what's interesting is, the book isn't really a completed story either. It's just, it kind of sets things up and tells part of the story. And then I think Dick was actually planning on a sequel. I think he did start writing it, but it was never finished. So I'm very curious to see, how the series, goes beyond what Dick originally wrote or planned for. because that's not just like, I mean, that he, you know, Dick was a very interesting writer and had some really, really, you know, complicated and complex, but and yet fun and whimsical ideas that are uniquely his. I mean, you can't just like copy Philip K. Dick. You can just hope to adapt him faithfully, you know. And I'm curious to see how people kind of reverse engineer his storytelling to tell future stories that go beyond his writing.
I mean, the one of the things I liked about this, The Man in the High Castle, was even though they were adding their own elements to it, they were very faithful to the book. There was, I had read the book ages ago before watching it, and then as I was watching it, I was going, "Oh, wait a minute, that's from the book. That's from the book. Yeah. That's from the." It was really nice because it, from the outset, it kind of looked like they took the idea and, you know, went, "We're just going to go, all right, we'll take the name and the idea and just go our own way." So it was really gratifying to see that they actually, as well as adding their own stuff, which complements the material from the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's cool. I look forward to checking it out. I really, it is on my list. I don't have Amazon Prime at the moment, but I might treat myself an upgrade and definitely watch that one, because it's definitely a kind of interesting topic for me. So yeah. Well,
and now more than ever, especially here in the States. I mean, just because you look at how screwed up our politics are right now, and then you compare that to this alternate world where the Nazis won World War II, it's kind of like, I hope people are paying more attention to Man in the High Castle, because it's almost like they're getting a sneak peek of a direction we could possibly go in. I hope I'm overstating and exaggerating the situation, but it is a very interesting time right now.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that when that Trump was considered a joke at the beginning, and now is really, you know, actually being considered to win, you know, the vote for the Republican Party. Is just you just thought, no, this is crazy.
I know. We keep thinking, oh, it's crazy, it's never going to happen. Then it just keeps happening, and we're like, wait, it's really not going to happen, is it? And it just kind of keeps going on. So, yeah, we'll see. It's interesting, it's scary.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
No, you want to end with Trump? Really?
Surely that's not a good place. But yeah.
No, unless Keith, have you got any more questions?
Oh God, you know me. I could probably go on all evening, but no.
Go on, one more question.
I'm just okay. But one of the things we didn't really cover with your documentaries was you did the work on the Amazing Spider-Man as well, did you? Is that correct? Have I read that right?
You did, yeah. I worked on I've done 3 Spider-Man movies. I did Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, and then I worked on Amazing 1 and Amazing 2 with Mark Webb.
Ah, cool. Okay, yeah. I mean, that's kind of interesting, because I was going to ask what your thoughts were on Mark Webb's version of Spider-Man compared to Raimi's, but I might be putting you in a difficult position with that question if you worked on both.
Well, no, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I think they're both 2 different flavors of the same type of meal, basically. I mean, I think that the Raimi movies are, especially the second one, which I love. I think the second one I was lucky enough to work and be involved with, is such a great comic book movie, and certainly one of the best ones ever made. And then Mark's films, I thought, and it's kind of, there's a strange story behind my connection to Mark Webb, which is that in 1998, I was hired basically to direct 16 commercials for A&M Records for this rapper named Corrupt and his album Corruption that was coming out, and I shot these commercials, I think 16 commercials in 2 days. It was crazy how fast these got whipped out. But I had no editor at the time, and the producer on the show, or on the commercials, brought an editor in, and I met with them, and this young editor was named Mark Webb. And so Mark edited all these commercials with me, and we became friends. And then later I directed a music video that I brought Mark in as the editor of, and we just kind of became friends. And then, I knew that he was doing really well directing music videos. And then one day Fox called me and said, "Hey, we have a project we're thinking about you producing the behind the scenes for." And I said, "Oh, what is it?" And they said, "It's this movie called 500 Days of Summer." And I said, "God, that sounds really familiar. I think I just heard about that." And they said, "Yeah, well, you should. Your friend Mark directed it." So I was like, "Oh, okay." And that kind of rekindled our friendship. And then he brought me into Amazing One and Amazing Two. And so I had a different perspective, because here I was, not just a documentarian, but I was kind of cheering my friend on, who I was so proud of, and I was just so happy to see that he was not just advancing his career, but that he was getting to tell these, really fun stories on a bigger canvas than I think he was ever considering he would do. So I was just more of a cheerleader on the side, just who happened to be operating a camera now and then, or who was conducting interviews. And it's really interesting how his films were received versus the Raimi films, because I do believe that there was a lot of value and like, creatively speaking, to what he was bringing to that world, because you can't just keep remaking the same things over and over again. I think you have to give it a different spin each time, just to keep it, not just to keep it interesting, but also to kind of make it more relatable to modern audiences. Otherwise, they should just watch the original story or movie or whatever it is that you're remaking. So it was a really interesting experience just to observe on those, because again, I couldn't be as objective as I normally would be. I couldn't just tell the story. I felt like I needed to put myself in Mark's shoes and try to understand where he was coming from. And I think on the whole, he did a really great job. And it ended the way it ended, and now they're moving on in a different direction. And I'm excited to see that too. I'm sure that's going to be awesome, because I love Marvel, and I think Marvel's been doing a hell of a job with their titles. So I don't see these different iterations of Spider-Man or any other character as things to compete against each other or to contrast against each other. I think they're kind of just fun to see all the different visions that will come out of it. I mean, that's true for pretty much every major franchise. I kind of look forward to the different directors. It's almost like a film festival based on one subject. It's like, that's why I love the Alien movies, because it's 4 movies basically about the same monster, but from 4 radically different directors, and I really enjoy that diversity in storytelling.
Yeah, I think that's a really refreshing way of looking at it, actually. Because as I said, a lot of people, they compare and contrast, but not necessarily in positive ways. But it is absolutely like they've been doing with the comic books for years. It's different adaptations of that source material. And maybe those ones weren't different enough. Maybe that was some of the problems. But I see Mark Webb's doing all right for himself, though, because I notice he's gone on now to be producer and director of the Limitless TV series. I don't know whether you've caught that, but he's credited for every episode of that now. So
Yeah,
he's doing all right for himself.
he's doing good, and I mean, he's a really great guy, and he's super talented, and yeah, he's really a wonderful filmmaker. So I'd love to see him continue on with what he started with Spider-Man, but obviously it's going in a different direction. But hey, we got to see at least 2 of them, and I'm happy about that.
I just wanted to say, I'm a big fan of the assembly cut of Alien 3, and when comparing the 2 of them, I would always watch that one. And I know you had a lot to do with the assembly cut, and I just wondered if you've had any more contact with David Fincher over it, or if he still just doesn't want to know.
Well, I mean, truthfully, I never had any contact with Fincher over it. I mean, we'd send out messages, and we'd occasionally get messages back, but it was never like, I never had like a one-on-one with him where I got to like, get the full scoop of what he wanted or what he even cared about. Basically, we started that with the mandate of, he doesn't really care because he doesn't consider it his movie, so do whatever you want with it, just don't call it a director's cut. And that kind of like guided us on this path of restoration, of trying to dig up a version of the film that previously existed that was something that Fincher and editor Terry Rawlings had worked on. So it had some, it was an authentic, piece of the puzzle. It was something. It was an artifact of the production. So we found that. I mean, it took a while and going through tons of boxes with from the Fox archive, but we found this early test screening cut, and it was the last cut, I believe, before there was a lot of sort of quote unquote studio interference and reshoots and test screening notes and things like that. So if there was ever pure version of Alien 3, which, is, you can't even say that with a straight face, but if there was a pure version of it, it was that, I think. The film, I mean, if you watch my documentary on it, you'll see that the film was, creatively compromised from even before Fincher, so it was a really tricky and problematic production, which obviously was gold for me in terms of the documentary. I mean, that was just amazing material to discuss and go into. But this work print edition, or this assembly cut, or whatever we're calling it, that was more about restoring what existed and finishing visual effects that weren't completed, and trying to polish it up to make it a presentable version of the movie. So it wasn't just a scratchy work print that had temp music from other movies in it. We tried to make it a presentable, something you could actually watch in a theater, but a version of that cut. And that required, several new effect shots that had to be finished. And, I did consult with Richard Edlund about that. I talked to him, and he gave me a binder full of notes and things that we could kind of use as a guide. And, we'd get the occasional mysterious, communicate back and forth between, Fincher's office and our office. And it was kind of an interesting experience. And, I've told the story before, but one day I came back to my office, and we're in the middle of restoring Alien 3, and there's a voicemail from me. And it basically goes like this. It's like, and by the way, I have to preface this by saying I produced the DVD for and the Blu-ray for 1 Hour Photo, for Mark Romanik's film 1 Hour Photo. And so this message is on my voicemail, and it's, Charles, this is David Fincher. Mark Romanik told me to call you about Alien 3, and then it hangs up. It was literally that tortured. It was such a tortured. Like, he didn't even want to talk. He didn't want to even say the words Alien and 3 in the same sentence. So yeah, that was about as close as we came to any kind of official communication. I wish I could have that voicemail.
I remember reading the Dark Horse comic, and I remember there was one bit in the comic book where they showed the Queen embryo coming out of Newt and swimming into Sigourney into Ripley's mouth. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, was that ever filmed, or was that just something that was an early draft of a script that Dark Horse got?
I believe that to be strictly an early draft, and there might have been some plans to do it at some point, but I didn't see any footage. I mean, we went through a lot of footage to try to cobble this cut together. I mean, it wasn't just that we found a cut and we just transferred it. We had to go into the negative and kind of conform the negative to the new cut that we found. So in doing that, we also went through tons of other bits of footage for the behind the scenes extras, because a lot of my documentaries, one thing I like to do is I like to pull outtakes and raw footage and alternate angles, so you can at least have a different experience. You're not just watching a clip show from the movie, And so in part of that discovery process, we were looking for everything, and we found like alternate shots of the super facehugger, the Queen facehugger, that was not in Fincher and Rawlings, work print cut, that we included in the documentary. So we if it was there, we would have included it in some form.
Yeah.
It's just that we didn't see it. I mean, that happened not like on Blade Runner. People have said, oh, there's this bit where Deckard reloads his gun, or you see Batty talking to so-and-so in the vidphone booth. And it's like, well, I personally, myself, went through, I think it was like 997 boxes of film elements. I went through all that myself, and I didn't see any of that stuff. Doesn't mean it didn't exist. It just does not exist now. It's not there in the vault. So that's kind of, that I just do the best I can. It's like
oh no, it was always something that I was always curious about, because like in a comic book, it's quite easy to draw something like that, but to actually make it happen, especially back then, would have been very difficult to have had this little animated embryo come out the mouth, swim, and then go into Ripley's mouth. So I was just curious to know if they even attempted it.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure it was under discussion. It's funny how people's childhood memories kind of become a real thing in people's brains, because, for instance, when I was a kid, you'd read the Star Wars storybooks, right? And the Star Wars storybook had 2 still images of Luke meeting Biggs on Tatooine, and it's like, I spoke with kids who swore that was in the CBS TV version of Star Wars that aired, like Biggs and Luke talking on Tatooine, and I kept trying to say, no, it was never there. It was just in the storybook that you saw as a kid, and your own imagination filled in the blanks with those images that you saw. It's the same on Alien. The heavy metal illustrated story of Alien has a couple panels where the alien is sort of like in this hibernation mode, and it looks like a big biomechanical box. Okay, and like fans online have argued like that this box existed, and that they swore that they saw the alien kind of unfold out of this box and stand up and block the corridor, preventing Ripley from escaping. And I swear I went through all the footage looking for that damn box, and it does not exist. It's there on the page, and if you look at it, it doesn't really even look that technically that specifically Giger-esque. It's definitely alien looking, and it's a great idea, and it's beautifully illustrated in the comic book. But there's no conceptual art that I could find. There was no stills. That's the other thing, is I go through like the photo galleries or the photo archives of these studios, and those are tens of thousands of images sometimes, and you see pretty much everything that they were even thinking about doing, even if it doesn't exist as motion picture. It's there in still photography, and that box was not there. So I have to convince people that the box is not shot. It might have been thought about and discussed. And there is footage of the alien like rising in the corridor, and people I think see that and they assume, oh, it must have been the box at some point. So there's like little back alleys in human memory, I think, that just sometimes, much like Aiden and Crave, not to bring it back around to that, where you just kind of like imagine that you saw something and you just think that that's real, and it's not.
Oh wow, though, as a fanboy, it must be so interesting and so cool to go through all this stuff as part of your job, though. It must be amazing.
Well, I mean, especially when it's movies that you grew up with and that you love. Like, even if you weren't working in the film business, if you really loved a certain movie and then you get to go through this stuff, yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, again, there was a whole variety of things on Blade Runner that I discovered I had no idea existed, and deleted scenes I didn't even know existed, that I don't even think anyone, apart from the production, even realized like that stuff had been shot. And it was really so much fun to like dig that up and present it so people could be kind of surprised. I think that was the biggest thing when the Blade Runner 5-disc set came out, was hardcore fans of the film for many, many years who thought they knew everything suddenly were seeing a ton of things they had no idea even existed. And that was one of my greatest joys when that came out and I got the reaction. That was a lot of fun. And I knew, for like the years we were working on that project, I knew that was coming. Like I said, I had seen the stuff and I had to be quiet about it, but I just couldn't wait to see the reaction of that. And that's always the fun thing when you're doing a catalog title, is when you unearth something. Like with Aliens, like the Burke cocoon scene that for so long had been unreleased. And I saw it, whatever, 13 years ago, whenever it was, I was working on the quadrilogy DVD set, but we couldn't release it because we didn't have approval to release it. And then it finally came out on the Blu-ray, and then suddenly you get the reaction that you've been holding inside yourself for years. So that's the pro and the con, is you get to see it, but you can't always share it.
Was with the Blade Runner 5-disc set, was it always the plan to release every cut of the film?
That was kind of an evolving plan. There was always the idea that we wanted to basically, I mean, this isn't meant as a criticism, but I looked at what was happening with the Star Wars special editions and reaction to people just being upset they couldn't get those original versions. And I totally sympathize with that. I thought, you know what, let's make sure that we get as many versions as we can so that people can not only enjoy their favorite version, but also you can see the evolution of the cut, not just creatively, but also politically, like all the behind the scenes players who all had a say in it, which is frankly the reason why there's so many cuts, because Ridley didn't really get his say in the early days of the film. So it was not just a matter of evolution and archival material. It was also trying to make people happy, so that was the goal, was to make people happy and give them as many versions of the film as we could. And I remember one day in a meeting at Warner Brothers, we were just talking about the versions, and then I kind of just randomly said, if you really want to get them excited, put the work print on. And then, and to their credit, Warner's jumped on it. They were like, they you could tell them, like, they were kind of factoring it in their brains, like, okay, how are we going to make this work? Because it has all this temp music from other movies. It has music from like Planet of the Apes and Humanoids from the Deep and The Hand. It's like, it's a clearance issue, and then where is the work print? Like, how can we even present that? So it was interesting that on a whim, I just happened to say, like, hey, that would be really cool, guys, if we could do that. And then Warner Brothers made it happen. And that was one of the great joys of Blade Runner, was like working with a studio like Warner, is that gets it. and they were so supportive and so just like eager to make this the grand slam release that it needed to be. And I think that we accomplished that. I mean, there are things I look back and wish I could have done differently or polished better or just wish we had more time for. But on the whole, I feel like we delivered what the fans were counting on.
Oh, definitely.
Well, I think you delivered more than the fans were expecting.
Yeah, we thank you.
A lot more.
We thank you for suggesting that, because that's great. It's what we all want from those films, definitely. I also noticed you got to at least mention this before you go. You did some work on Twin Peaks as well. Is that correct? On a behind the scenes for that?
Yeah, I produced the gold box DVD and then the entire mystery Blu-ray set.
Right, cool.
Yeah,
because I've got the gold box thing ready to rewatch before they when they eventually get round to the next series.
Well, you should try to get the Blu-ray set, because the Blu-ray, first of all, looks and sounds much better, and also there's a ton more material on it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Really great stuff. Yeah, really good stuff on the Blu-ray.
Well, add it to the wish list then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen it, but there's a longer cut of Fire Walk with Me on there, isn't there?
There's like about 90 minutes of deleted scenes edited into sort of a continuous experience. So it's almost like, it's kind of like what I did with the Blade Runner deleted scenes, where I took all the deleted scenes and stitched together a mini narrative, like a 46-minute or 47-minute narrative. It's like that. So basically, David Lynch himself, took the 90 minutes of deleted scenes and alternate scenes from Fire Walk with Me, and fully finished them and polished them up and did sound design and music and everything, and made it like a coherent, mini movie, basically, or alternate version of the movie. So you can watch it and experience it as a story, and as a piece of film, and not just leftovers, like scraps off the table. I mean, this is a really fully produced piece that he and his people did. So it's I think that was one of the holy grails for sure of all the other discs I've worked on. I know the fans wanted that one quite a bit. I mean, that was like, people were campaigning for decades to get those deleted scenes released. And Ken Ross at CBS DVD, he worked out the deal with David Lynch, and between the two of them, I think we can thank them for making that dream become a reality.
Well, I imagine he was quite hesitant over the fact that the TV cut of June wasn't to his liking, to the fact that he actually took his name off the credits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know his thinking on that one, but I think that the fact that he pulled an Alan Smithy on that one kind of speaks volumes. So yeah. Anytime he takes the name off something, it's not a good sign.
No, not when you think of all that work and then you don't want your name on it. So yes, it has to be bad.
Yeah. I got to say though, I mean, I'm one of those people. I love Dune. I think Dune is a very underrated film, and I keep hoping that one day that'll get the proper treatment it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of it as well, and having watched the miniseries as well, it's kind of like it's the book, but it's not as good as David Lynch's Dune. I'd love to see somebody really take a crack at that film, but I think David Lynch he wasn't a big fan of the experience or the reaction to it. It's well, I mean, hopefully one day, it'd be, somebody will do, an all singing, all dancing disc on it.
Yeah.
Actually, that brings up a question for me. What do you think is the future of film? Because we're starting to see things move away from DVD and Blu-ray and heading more towards streaming and online. Do you think that's the way it's going to go, or are we going to see another format come along?
Well, I mean, we are going to see another format. We're going to probably see a couple of them or a few of them before things go fully streaming. I mean, I love physical media. I love buying something and having the thing on my shelf and know that it exists. I don't like this idea of things that are out in the ether that are sort of like I paid for, but if a major catastrophe happens and we lose all that material, am I going to still have access to what I paid for? I mean, that's paranoid and kind of ridiculous, but I do believe in physical media. So having said that, yeah, I think everything's going to go the way of streaming and digital downloads, and I think it's unavoidable, and I get it. I mean, it's the convenience of it is very enticing. But ironically, David Lynch famously bashed people who watch a movie on their iPhone, and I feel like can you imagine Lawrence of Arabia on your iPhone? I mean, it's ridiculous, So I get the convenience, and I get the fact that the modern human doesn't really care about the artistry the way some of us do, some film purists do. But yeah, it's kind of sad too, because I'm noticing like shot composition is changing. Like people when they're on set and they're looking at a video monitor, they start composing for a home video experience because they're basically looking at the monitor the size of their TV set at home in most cases. Yeah. And I kind of think back to the days when you didn't have that, when you had to basically trust your cinematographer and you were there on location, you took in the full sight of what you were seeing. And now I just feel like things are getting more and more kind of visually, homogenous, if that's the correct way to put it. I just feel like it's getting to be kind of samey, and I wish it wasn't. And that boils down to just, we want things easy, we want it now, we want it free. And yeah. I think viewers are becoming extremely spoiled on multiple levels, and I have to admit, I am often like that. I'll want to see something when I'm on a plane, and I shouldn't be seeing it. I mean, one of my favorite directors working right now is David Ayer, and I was only able to see Fury for the first time on a plane on a tiny little screen. I mean, I was furious, but I thought, well, I got to see the movie. I didn't have a chance to see it before then, and now I saw it, and then I saw it again on a bigger screen. So it was almost like a preview. It was like a 2-hour trailer for seeing the real movie. But
you were furious about Fury, yeah.
Correct.
I agree though with a lot of the things that you're saying there. I mean, for me, Blu-ray, it is that collector's medium. It's for collectors and completists and people who are passionate about it. And I mentioned in a podcast we did before, sort of liking it to books. And it's quite funny because I've got a few Blu-rays that are actually digibook Blu-rays. So they have like a sort of 45-page book as part of the cover. And I love that because that's like combining two of my favorite things in something that you can put on a shelf. It's brilliant. So I hope it continues. But yeah, like Simon correctly raised, it is probably a dying medium in the long run, which is kind of sad, but the way things are.
Well, I mean, I remember as a kid, just when I'd get like an LP, and I'd listen to the music on the album, and I would just stare at the cover, the front and the back of the cover, or if it opened up, I mean, I would just I would have that physical visual stimulus to go with the music, and that was such a simpler and I think more innocent and elegant time in terms of enjoying entertainment. And now I just feel like we're having data just like plugged into our brains, and I don't know, the romance is going away, I think, and that's the sad part of it for me, which is why I try to keep it alive in my own life in terms of the way I enjoy film and art and music. I try to keep it old school, but I'm also well aware, just as someone who has to survive in this business, that it's definitely changing, and it's already changed, and keep our fingers crossed that it still remains something we're all interested in. I feel like so much of it's been devalued that I regret the way that it's gone. But I guess the story is just keep fighting to tell great stories. Like that's the goal.
It is. There's some of us out there who still that's our goal, is to sort of tell good stories, so that people would take interest, and try not to do something that you'll see in the cinema, a lot.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's a good place to end.
That is actually a very positive note to end on. So yes, I much as I could talk all night, I'm in total agreement there that's a good place to put a line under it. So great. Cool.
Okay, we are going to end in our normal fashion, and that's we let the listeners at home know where they can find our work on the internet. So Charles, where's a good place to find your work?
Wow, I don't really have like a hub per se. I mean, you can just go to my IMDb page, I guess, and look up everything I've done and see if any of that appeals to you. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, although I barely use Twitter. But my name is unique enough. I think if you're able to spell it correctly, you'll find whatever it is that I've done.
Yeah, you've got a pretty good Wikipedia page actually that has quite a lot of information about you, and even a photo of you at WonderCon 2015. How about that? There you go.
Oh, it's great. It reminds me how much weight I have to lose. It's great.
So Keith, where can we find your work?
Yeah, okay, if you go to YouTube and you put in British Eyles, that's Eyles spelled Eyles, as in my last name. You like what I did there, right? British Eyles. And you can find there 6 short films that I wrote, produced, and directed for your viewing.
And as always, you can find my work at independentrunnings.com. You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, and on YouTube. Please leave a review and rating on iTunes and Stitcher because it all helps. And do join us for our next podcast. So I think that just leaves us to say thank you for talking to us, Charles.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. I loved how long it went. I guess you guys will be calling tomorrow at noon for part 2.
To continue, yes.
Yeah, great. No, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for doing it.
No, thank you.